Touch with Officer Don Ray the DA. I am your host, Allison Beck. And today, Officer Don and Ray the DA discuss the crime rates of Lexington and the cost of crime for 2013 so far. Please take a minute and look at our website on lexingtonprosecutor.com. Thank you for listening.
We got the crime report for July, and in general, overall for the year, crime's down a little bit, but crime is up from this time last month.
Okay.
And I worry about it. I worry about trends. And if it goes up from one month to another, then I worry that, uh-oh, here we go, this is going to happen. It's up almost 13% from last month. So whenever I start talking about this stuff, there's a group that get their panties in a wad over it, and they start getting nervous, and they fact of the matter is the facts are facts. And any rate, once again, the violent crime rate, which is the murders, the rapes, the robberies, and the big-time assaults, constitute only 6% of the crime in Lexington. And there's a reason for that, and that's because those are the bums that are put in jail and kept there, you see. Now, that keeps their ability to repeat down. What 94% are the property crimes, and that's the burglaries and the big-time thefts and the auto thefts and arsons and that sort of stuff. 94% of the crime. And the reason that continues to be such a huge number in Lexington is because those are perceived by our legislature as the kind of crimes they do not want sent to prison. And these are the prolific repeat offenders that just do it over and over and over again. We also keep up with what's going on in the court system. And did you know, Officer Don, that in Fayette Circuit Court so far this year, 60% of the criminals that go through there that are sentenced, convicted and sentenced, are probated, 60%. 40% are put into custody. Now, and when these 60% are put on probation, the judge gives them certain conditions that they have to comply with, right? And if they don't, they typically say, now, here's the deal. If you violate the conditions that I'm putting on you, you're dead meat. Mm-hmm. Got it? The guy says, sure. Well, when they do violate it, as most of them do, 55% of them are reprobated. So there's another second chance. So they're getting more and more second chances. And what's the message? The message is you don't need to really expect to be suffering any particular consequences.
Well, the 40% that are sentenced, there's a percentage of those individuals that wind up being shock probated as well. So they're sentenced, and then within 30 days, if they're sentenced to 5 years, there's a decent chance they'll actually be released anyway. Right?
Sure.
So you got 60% that don't go to jail, and then 40% that are sentenced and sent to jail. As soon as people aren't looking, they wind up being let back out.
That's exactly
That's
right.
basically what you're dealing with. And it's a double-edged sword. They say drug offenders, and we need to release those people so we can make room for the violent offenders. That was sort of the rallying cry that they used to release people from prison. And when you say that the majority of the offenders are property crimes, and they see that as a success, they say, well, our violent crime is down. It's just property crime.
Well,
So that's part of the argument. That's what the frustration here.
Right.
And what you're saying is, I mean, let's look for a second. Go back, if you don't care. I saw the numbers from June to July.
Mm-hmm.
Give an example of how many burglaries that we had in June versus July. I saw a comparison there. Is it in front of you still?
well, one of the
They're up like 35%,
Right.
like that.
yeah, it's
Now I take that back. That's not burglaries. That's thefts, like people breaking into
you
cars.
have 225 burglaries in this town just in July.
Okay.
220.
It's people breaking into homes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
You got 815 big-time thefts, larcenies is what we call them. you got 82 cars that are stolen. Now let me tell you something that just people are surprised at is the value of the property that's stolen. And just in July, it was almost $2 million. And so far for this year, it's been almost $11 million value of property that's stolen. And that includes the damage that's caused when that happens.
So if somebody busts the window of your car to steal a $100 GPS, that $100 is counted in that $11 million figure. But the $600 it costs to replace your car window, whatever it is not counted.
Yeah. The one of the things that people want to know is that what's happening with drugs, and we haven't talked a lot about that, but I've kind of insisted on getting that information. And in June, last year, all of last year, there were 2,800 drug arrests.
Mm-hmm.
So far this year, there have been 1,700 drug arrests. Now, typically somebody gets picked up for a drug or a marijuana charge. It means they're doing something else.
Yes, I see what you're saying.
You see, they typically are stopped, and the next thing you know, they find that they're possessing marijuana and all that stuff. But they've done something to cause the police to stop them. That sort
to
of
initiate
thing.
that contact.
Right. And last year, there were 727 of those possession of marijuana. So far this year, there are 435 people. The whole concept that marijuana is harmless, they say, well, that's a lot of people that have done something wrong that cause the police to pay attention to them, stop them. Next thing you know, they got marijuana, and so you got doing things wrong and marijuana. Then there's some kind of a connection there. So that's kind of what's going on there. One of my favorite people in the world is Dr. Thomas Sowell, and I got something that I want to take a second and read to you.
Okay.
He says, and this was years ago that he wrote this, "We are forever rediscovering the obvious. Just a couple of years ago, the intelligentsia were complaining about the fact that the United States was locking up record numbers of people. Now, their solution was to turn criminals loose. That's the solution for many of the politicians. And the reason was to save themselves the trouble of coming up with the money to pay for keeping criminals locked up. That was the philosophy that caused Illinois back in the 1980s to try to save $60 million from their state budget by releasing prisoners 3 months early. That's 90 days early. The people of Illinois lost more than 5 times that much, $304 million, in indirect and direct costs of the crimes committed by those people who were released during the 90 days. They should still have been behind bars. That was not all of the costs, nor the most important. 23 people were murdered at the hands of those prisoners during the time they still should have been in prison. In addition, those people turned loose early committed 32 rapes, 262 arsons, hundreds of robberies, and thousands of burglaries just in those 3 months. Now we're seeing the same stinking thing happen because the Kentucky legislature has done exactly what they did in Illinois in the 80s. At some point, I wish we would begin not to have to relearn all of these very expensive lessons. So, good for Thomas Sowell. He's the man.
Well, and in Illinois, you look at cities like Chicago, where that's a violent place. I mean, Chicago, their murder rate's up, the property crimes are up.
Everything's up.
Everything is up in Chicago.
Well, Chicago, you know, if you read, and you do, I read a lot. Chicago is in the process of getting themselves in the same kind of situation Detroit was in several years ago. And if they don't get their act together, people are gonna be leaving there in a big, big hurry.
Yeah, we talked about Detroit last week. What was shocking about Detroit, for me, is the clearance rate on murders. Basically, in Detroit, was it 20%? Is it?
10% are solved.
What we're saying, if you murder someone in Detroit, Michigan, you have a 90% chance of getting away with it.
Getting away with murder.
You're not going to be arrested. 90%, up to 90% of the people that commit a murder in Detroit get by with it. Now, you think about that for a second. You compare that to the city we live in here in Lexington, where right now you're looking at, you've got a 90% plus chance of being caught if you commit a murder in Lexington. And, you know, in this town, that doesn't just include from an investigator standpoint, the murders where you know who a suspect is right away. For instance, in a domestic violence, generally you know who the suspect is in a case like that. But even the ones where the police, when they get on the scene, they don't have a suspect. They're still able to develop a suspect and bring those murders to a conclusion. A lot of that is because of the resources that's put into it, how the community views those type of crimes. You know, and it's still shocking to us here in Lexington to have a murder. The citizens are still shocked. They want something done about it. They haven't reached a point where they just accept it as the cost of doing business. That's the most important thing, really, right there. Because if the people in Detroit, if they didn't become numb to it and didn't accept it, trust me, they would be able to do something about it. But it's not like you see on television. Most of these murders are not resolved as a result of forensic evidence. They're resolved because of the people in the community standing up and providing police information, correct?
That's correct.
And they're not afraid to be witnesses, they're not afraid to testify. And then the forensic evidence normally comes into play after you develop your suspect. It's very rare that you get a suspect from fingerprints, that you get a suspect from DNA. All the forensic evidence does, in most cases, is just help you confirm the person that you already suspected of doing the crime. It puts them at the scene.
We're very lucky in Lexington because our citizens get involved. Now we're starting to see a little bit of this incident murder blindness that happens when there's a group of 25 or 30 people around, somebody shoots and kills somebody, then everybody just immediately was struck blind.
You know, part of the reason for that is people see, they know about someone who's committed a murder, and then they see him back on the street, in 10 or 15 years or sooner. And they go, wait a second, I just testified against that dude 10 years ago, and they've released him. Unfortunately, that's a problem, because witnesses, they're like, look, I will testify against somebody if I know that they're going to be put away forever after I point a finger at them. But people get hesitant when they're like, I'll point my finger at this person, tell you what I saw, and put up with them mean mugging me the whole time, because I know if they're convicted, they're going to go off to jail and be gone. But when people learn that that's not always the case, it makes them afraid, does it not?
Yes. One of the things I want to talk about on one of these In Touch programs is this thing that's going under everybody's radar. Nobody will talk about it, and that's black on black crime. As you well know, most of the victims of black perpetrators are black. Most of the victims of white perpetrators are white. Most of the victims of Hispanic perpetrators are Hispanic. And Chicago, for example, we'll have a homicide here, and we get all fired up about it. They have homicides, lots of them, and they're almost always young black men being killed by young black men. And you don't hear these characters like Sharpton or Jesse Jackson or that crowd out there harping about that. They don't. And I don't understand it, but they'll jump all over Trayvon Martin. They need to start looking at the real other tragedies that are going on in this world, and I want to talk about it sometime because I don't think anybody else will.
Well, make sure you go to LexingtonProsecutor.com for more criminal justice news and views. Everything's on the website there. We were talking about probation. You can actually look up, I guess, you still have the judges on
Yeah,
there?
yeah.
And who
Hey,
who's doing probation?
one judge is actually probating 71% of the cases that go in front of him. Go to our website, you'll find out who.
Check it out, LexingtonProsecutor.com, and we'll see you next week on In Touch.